My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "Now that we're expecting our fourth, I really think it's time you and Mum considered moving somewhere more appropriate. A retirement village, maybe. Somewhere with support. You're not getting any younger." I stood there in my own kitchen, holding a cup of tea I'd just made. And I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. I'm 63 years old. I still mow my own lawn. I drove to Ballarat last winter to help my mate fix a fence. I go walking every morning at 5:30, rain or shine. And my daughter-in-law, standing in the kitchen I built with my own hands 31 years ago, was suggesting I pack up and ship myself off to a retirement village. I didn't say anything right away. I just put my cup down on the bench, very carefully, and walked outside. My wife found me 20 minutes later, standing in the backyard, looking at the vegetable garden. "Did she just say what I think she said?" my wife asked. "Yeah," I said. "She did." We stood there together for a while, not saying much. The tomatoes were coming in nicely. I'd been meaning to stake the tall ones before the weekend. That was the moment I think we both knew quietly, without saying it out loud, that something had shifted, and not in a good way. Let me back up a bit, because this story doesn't make sense without the full picture. My name is Graham. My wife is Carol. We bought our home in the outer suburbs of Melbourne back in 1993, a 4-bedroom place on a good-sized block, back when you could still do that on a tradesman's wage and a bit of discipline with money. We paid it off by 2011. No fanfare, no party. We just made the last payment, went out for a nice dinner, and felt quietly proud of ourselves. We raised 2 kids in that house. Our daughter, Melissa, lives in Queensland now with her husband. We see her at Christmas, and she calls every Sunday without fail. She's never once asked us for anything we didn't offer first. Then there's our son. I'll call him by his name, Daryl. He's 36 now. When he was younger, he was a good kid. Worked hard, played footy, helped around the house without too much grumbling. I was proud of him. He met his wife, I'll call her by her name too, because she's earned it, Cheryl, about 8 years ago. She seemed nice enough at first. Organized, driven, confident. I thought those were good qualities. But there's a version of confident that's actually just an unwillingness to consider anyone else's point of view. And that's what we were dealing with. About 4 years ago, Daryl lost his job. The company he worked for downsized. A lot of people got made redundant. It wasn't his fault. He was in between things for about 3 months, and Cheryl was pregnant with their second. They asked if they could stay with us temporarily while they sorted themselves out. We said yes. Of course we said yes. He's our son. What I didn't fully appreciate was the word temporarily apparently meant something very different to Cheryl than it did to Carol and me. 3 months became 6. 6 became 12. By the time their third child arrived, they'd been living in our house for 2.5 years, and there was no longer any conversation happening about when they might leave. During that time, things changed in the house. Slowly, then all at once. In that way that makes you feel like you've been boiled alive without noticing the temperature rising. Cheryl started rearranging things. Not dramatically at first, just moving the toaster, reorganizing the pantry, suggesting the spare room might work better as a playroom. Small things. Easy to dismiss. Carol would come to the kitchen and find her dishes in the wrong cupboard. Her herbs moved off the windowsill to make room for Cheryl's blender. Her good tablecloth, the Belgian linen one, her mother, had given her folded away at the back of the cupboard because it collected crumbs. I had a shelf in the garage where I kept my father's tools. His old chisels, his brace and bit, the wooden-handled hammer he'd bought in 1971. Daryl mentioned one afternoon that Cheryl wanted to use that shelf for the kids' bikes. He looked apologetic when he said it. He always looked apologetic. He just never did anything about it. I moved the tools into a box and put them in the back of the wardrobe in our room. That was the day I should have said something clearly. I know that now. Instead, I told myself we were being flexible. We were helping. That's what family does. But somewhere in that bargain, I lost track of who was actually in charge of the place where Carol and I had lived for 30 years. The suggestion of the retirement village wasn't even Cheryl's first attempt at reorganizing our futures. About 6 months before that, she had sat us down very formally, like a work meeting, and presented what she called a long-term plan for the property. I remember she actually used that phrase, the property, like it was a development site. The plan involved converting our home into a dual occupancy setup with a granny flat built out the back. We would move into the granny flat. They would have the main house. And this was the part that made my eye twitch. We would contribute toward the building costs, which she had estimated at around $80,000. So we're all invested equally. I'm a carpenter by trade. I've been building things for 40 years. I looked at her costings and didn't say anything. Because the number was so far off reality, I didn't know where to start. Carol asked, very calmly, who would own what under this arrangement? Cheryl said we'd work that out with a solicitor. Carol nodded slowly, the way she does when she's listening carefully and forming an opinion she's not quite ready to share. I said we'd think about it. We thought about it. Then we didn't bring it up again, hoping the whole thing would quietly go away. That was our second mistake, or maybe our fourth. I'd lost count. Instead, Cheryl brought it up again at Christmas dinner, in front of everyone, including Melissa and her husband, who had flown down from Queensland, framing it as though we'd already agreed in principle and were just sorting out the details. Melissa looked at us with this expression. I'll never forget it, like she was trying very hard not to say something. Later that night, when Daryl and Cheryl had gone to bed and Melissa was helping Carol with the dishes, I heard Melissa say, quietly, Mom, you know you don't have to do any of this, right? Carol didn't answer straight away. She kept drawing a plate. I know, love, she finally said. The retirement village suggestion came in May. A Tuesday morning, mild weather. About 9 o'clock. I remember it clearly because I'd just come back from my walk and was still in my tracksuit. Cheryl had the manner of someone who'd been rehearsing. She sat at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, with a cup of coffee she'd made, without asking if anyone else wanted one. And she walked us through her reasoning, like she was presenting a business case. They needed more space. 4 children, the 4th was due in November in a shared house, wasn't sustainable. She'd done some research. There were very lovely retirement villages in the area, some with really excellent facilities. A few of them had waiting lists, so the sooner we looked into it, the better. It's just practical, she said. And honestly, I think you'd enjoy the community aspect. People your age. Similar interests. People your age. I was 63. Carol was 61. Cheryl, Carol said, very quietly, this is our house. Cheryl gave this small, patient smile. The kind of smile that suggests the other person isn't quite grasping the situation. I know that, Carol. But circumstances change, don't they? You have to think about the future. I thought about saying a number of things. I thought about pointing out that the future she was describing was one where 2 people in their early 60s, in perfectly good health, handed over their paid-off family home so their son and daughter-in-law could have more space for children they kept choosing to have. I thought about pointing out that we were, in fact, already thinking about our future, and it looked very different from her version of it. Instead, I said, I'll have a think. She seemed satisfied with that. She got up, rinsed her cup, and went down the hall to the kids' room. Carol and I looked at each other across the kitchen table. I'll call the solicitor tomorrow, Carol said. I nodded. That was the moment we stopped waiting to see what would happen and started deciding it ourselves. Here's what most people don't know about a quiet person. We notice everything. We remember everything. We just choose our timing carefully. In the weeks after Cheryl's retirement village suggestion, Carol and I didn't change our behavior at all. We were pleasant at dinner. I helped Daryl fix a tap in the bathroom. Carol babysat on the Friday night when they went out. We gave no indication that anything had shifted. But behind the scenes, we were methodical. We met with our solicitor, a very practical woman named Helen who had been doing property law for decades and had seen everything. We explained the situation. She explained our options. We left her office with a clear understanding of exactly where we stood, which was completely, entirely, on solid ground. The house was in both our names, had been since we bought it, and there was not a single legal mechanism by which anyone could compel us to move out of it or transfer it against our wishes. That helped. We also, separately, started having some conversations we should have had years earlier about what we actually wanted, not what we were willing to tolerate, not what we could make work, what we genuinely wanted. What we wanted, it turned out, was this. We wanted our house back. We wanted our mornings without someone else's chaos spilling into them. We wanted to have dinner at the table without a production meeting about household scheduling. We wanted to put Carol's tablecloth back out and keep my father's tools on the shelf in the garage. And beyond that, we had a dream we'd held quietly for about 15 years, the kind of dream you mention occasionally and then let drift away because life is busy. Carol's brother and his wife had retired to a small property near Castlemaine, up in the Victorian goldfields. Beautiful country. Quiet. An old weatherboard farmhouse on 7 acres, kitchen garden, a creek that ran in winter. We'd visited them every couple of years and always driven home feeling slightly wistful. They'd mentioned, a year ago, that their neighbors were thinking of selling. A small block, 2 acres. A cottage that needed work. The price they named was within reach, comfortably within reach. Actually, given what we had in savings and what we could add to it without touching our super, I'd filed that away. Now I took it back out. I called Carol's brother on a Saturday morning when Daryl and Cheryl had taken the kids to the football. I asked if the neighbors had sold yet. They hadn't. I asked if he thought they'd take a call from us. He said he thought they'd be very happy to hear from us. Carol was sitting across the table from me, watching my face. When I hung up, I said, "It's still available." She put both hands flat on the table and took a breath. "Right," she said. "Let's go and see it." We drove up to Castlemaine on a Wednesday, told no one where we were going, said we had some errands to run. The cottage was modest. 2 bedrooms, a sleep-out, a long veranda that faced west. The kitchen was original and needed replacing. One of the bathroom walls had damp. The garden had been let go for a couple of seasons, and the creek bank needed clearing. I stood in the backyard with the owners, a couple about 10 years older than us, moving to be closer to their daughter. And I looked at the old fruit trees, and the long grass, and the hill rising up behind the property. And I thought, I can fix this. I know exactly how to fix this. We made an offer that afternoon. It was accepted the following Monday. We told no one. Not Daryl. Not Cheryl. Not even Melissa yet. Though that felt harder, Melissa we told the following week. And she cried a little bit. The good kind of crying. She said, "Dad, I am so bloody relieved." Carol and I had, over those weeks, begun the quiet process of preparing. Not packing dramatically, just sorting. The things that were ours, the things that could be donated, the things that mattered and needed to come with us. Carol's tablecloth went into the good bag immediately. My father's tools were already in the wardrobe. We had a storage unit arranged for the transition period. We engaged a property manager and made some decisions about the Melbourne house that I won't detail here, except to say that they were our decisions, made for our reasons, and they did not involve any transfer of assets to anyone who hadn't earned them. We set a date. 6 weeks out, we kept getting up every morning and making breakfast and being perfectly pleasant at dinner. There was one moment, about 3 weeks before we left, that I think about sometimes. Daryl came and found me in the garage on a Sunday afternoon. I was out there doing some sorting, which he probably thought was just pottering. He leaned against the doorframe the way he used to as a teenager and watched me for a while. "Dad," he said eventually, "are you all right? You seem, I don't know, somewhere else." I looked at my son, 36 years old. Good-looking, tired around the eyes the way people get when they've got young kids and too much going on. I felt a pull of something that was equal parts love and grief. "I'm fine, mate," I said, just thinking. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more. He didn't. I think about that moment because I wonder if there was something I should have said then. Some version of, "Son, here's what's been happening. Here's what your wife has been doing. Here's what it's cost your mother. Here's where this is heading if you don't pay attention." But I'd tried versions of that conversation twice before, in earlier years, and both times Daryl had listened, nodded, and then gone back to his wife, and seemingly forgotten everything we'd discussed. The third time felt like it would cost more than I had left to give, so I didn't say it. I handed him a jar of old screws and said, "Do me a favor and sort the countersunk ones from the self-tappers." He spent the next hour in the garage with me, sorting screws and talking about the football. It was one of the best hours we'd had in years. I filed that away too. We left on a Friday morning in August. The removalists were booked for 7 a.m. I'd arranged it deliberately early, knowing that Daryl usually left for work by 7:30 and Cheryl took the kids to school at 8:15. The timing was tight but workable. We'd told Daryl the previous evening that the removalists were coming to take some furniture to storage, clearing things out, we said. He'd shrugged and said okay. He didn't ask many follow-up questions. The removalists were efficient. Everything was loaded by 9:15. Carol and I did one last walkthrough of the house. The rooms looked different without our things in them. Bigger and quieter. The way houses do. I stood in the doorway of what had been our bedroom for 31 years. The morning light came in through the window the same way it always had. I said goodbye to it privately, the way you do with things that have mattered. Then we got in the car and drove north. My phone started going off at about 11:30. I was on the Western Ring Road. Carol was in the passenger seat reading a book, and the phone started buzzing in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. Daryl. I let it ring out. It rang again. I let it ring out again. Then it was Cheryl. I declined. By the time we stopped for lunch at a bakery in Kyneton, Good Pies, I recommend it. I had 11 missed calls. By the time we pulled up at the cottage, which was around 2 in the afternoon, I had 26. Carol had 9 of her own. She'd put her phone in her bag at the start of the drive and hadn't looked at it since. We stood outside the cottage in the cool August air and looked at the hill behind the property and the old pear tree in the front yard that would need pruning, but was otherwise perfect, and neither of us reached for our phones. We had keys. We had a kettle in the back of the car. Carol had packed a box with all the essentials: tea, a few mugs, milk in a cooler bag, a packet of Tim Tams she'd been saving. We made tea on the veranda as the sun started getting low over the paddocks, and we watched the light go gold on the long grass. And we were very quiet together, in a way that was completely different from the quiet of recent years. That evening I called Daryl back. He was, I'll be honest, not his best self in that first conversation. He was confused, then upset, then accusatory. He said, "We couldn't just leave." I said that was interesting, because we had just left. He said, "What about the house?" I told him the house was still in our names, and we'd be managing it ourselves going forward. He said Cheryl was devastated. I said I was sorry to hear that. He said a few things that weren't his proudest moments. I let him say them. When he was finished, I said, "Daryl, we love you. We will always love you, but we are not moving to a retirement village. We are 63 and 61 years old, and we are going to live our lives on our own terms. When you're ready to have a proper conversation, we're here." Then I said goodnight and ended the call. Carol was sitting across from me on the veranda. She raised her mug. I raised mine. The weeks that followed were, I won't pretend otherwise, uncomfortable in some ways. There were difficult phone calls. There were some things said that will take time to smooth over. Daryl came around slowly, in the way that people do when the situation they've been avoiding finally becomes real. Cheryl was harder. She remains harder. That's something we're all still working through. But here is what I know now. Standing on the other side of it, there is a particular kind of tiredness that comes from spending years shrinking yourself in your own home. Not in one dramatic moment, just gradually, accommodation by accommodation, until you are living in a house that was once yours and somehow no longer feels like it. I had forgotten how solid it felt to take up space. The cottage needed work. I threw myself into it. New kitchen, damp in the bathroom sorted, the veranda boards replaced, the garden reclaimed. Carol planted herbs on the kitchen windowsill, her windowsill. Her tablecloth is on the table. My father's tools are back on the shelf in the shed, where I can see them when I'm working. We have coffee with Carol's brother and his wife on Sunday mornings. We walk the creek track when it's running in winter. We go to the Castlemaine markets. We have quiet evenings. We have our own life back, which we apparently needed to lose for a while before we fully understood what it was worth. Daryl and the kids came to visit in October. He spent a weekend helping me fix the back fence. It was the closest we'd been in probably 5 years. Cheryl didn't come, and that was fine. These things take the time they take. Melissa visited in November with her husband, and they stayed for a week. She helped Carol sort the garden, and they talked and laughed for hours. On the last morning, Melissa stood on the veranda looking out at the paddocks and said, "Mom and Dad, this is so you." It is. That's exactly what it is. If you're a parent reading this, or listening to this, and something in this story sounds familiar, the slow rearrangement, the small accommodations that become large ones, the sense of being quietly managed in a place that is supposed to be yours. I want to say this clearly. You do not have to wait until someone suggests a retirement village before you decide enough is enough. Love for your children is not the same as surrendering your autonomy to them. Generosity is not the same as erasing yourself. The house you built, the life you worked for, the marriage you've kept going, these things belong to you. They are yours to live in, on your own terms, for as long as you are breathing. Your children's choices are their responsibility. The number of children they have, the size of the home they can afford, the lifestyle they want to maintain, those are consequences of decisions they made, and it is not your obligation to absorb those consequences at the cost of your own life. The most loving thing you can do for yourself, for your marriage, sometimes even for your children, is to hold the line of who you are and what is yours. Because the moment you abandon that line, everyone loses something, including them. I spent too long confusing kindness with capitulation. I won't make that mistake again. Carol and I are doing well. The tomatoes are in. The pear tree needed less pruning than I thought. We are, for the first time in several years, exactly where we are supposed to be. I've been turning this whole thing over in my mind for a while now, and I keep coming back to one simple truth. Actions have weight. Not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, everyday sense that what we choose to do and what we choose to keep accepting shapes what happens to us next. There's no escaping that. Cheryl didn't arrive one day and demand the house. It built up over years. One small accommodation at a time. The rearranged pantry. The moved tools. The Belgian linen folded away at the back of the cupboard. And each time Carol and I let something go without saying clearly what we needed, we were teaching everyone in that house, including ourselves, that our comfort was negotiable. That was on us. I'm not saying Cheryl was right. She wasn't. but I played my part in letting things drift as far as they did. That's the thing about being a decent person in a situation that isn't decent. You can talk yourself into absorbing a lot more than you should, because you don't want to be the one who causes trouble. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being a good father. But there's a difference between patience and passivity, and I confused them for a long time. What changed things wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a dramatic argument or an ultimatum. It was a decision, quiet, deliberate, made between two people who had been married for 34 years and had finally sat still long enough to ask, what do we actually want? Not what can we live with. What do we want? That question took courage to ask honestly. And acting on the answer took more courage still. It would have been easier to keep the peace, to find yet another compromise, to tell ourselves the situation would eventually sort itself out. But courage in that context wasn't dramatic. It was booking a solicitor appointment. It was driving to Castlemaine on a Wednesday. It was making the phone call to Carol's brother. Small acts, done quietly, that added up to something that changed our lives. I think about Daryl a lot. He's my son, and I love him without condition. But love doesn't mean I carry the weight of his choices indefinitely, and it took me too long to understand that. He is a grown man. The size of his family, the state of his finances, the kind of husband and father he chooses to be, those are his responsibilities. When I finally stopped absorbing the consequences of his and Cheryl's decisions, something shifted between us. There's more honesty in our relationship now than there has been in years. That weekend, fixing the back fence, was worth more to me than any of the careful dinners we'd had while pretending everything was fine. The cottage is coming together. There are still things to fix, and probably always will be. But Carol's herbs are on the windowsill, and my father's tools are where I can see them. And every morning I walk out onto the veranda in the early light and think, I did this. We did this. Not because someone gave it to us, but because we decided we deserved it and then did the work to get there. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not a formula, not a list of steps, just the understanding that the life you want is on the other side of the decision to stop waiting for permission to live it. You have more power than you're using, and the people who love you, really love you, will respect you more for using it.